was married to a man in the Navy than it was when I was a single mother. And, those things change you. Change your relating to the world.
Mm-hmm. But during, the Cold War, because I know that you were a flight attendant, you had a job. Did you know a lot of women who didn't have jobs?
No.
So most of your friends had jobs?
That's the world I moved in, people who were working. So, I didn't know people who weren't working.
Mm-hmm. Did you see the propaganda of the women supposed to stay at home? Did you see a lot of that?
Oh, absolutely. It was okay to not stay at home when you were working if you were not married. If you were married, you were supposed to stay home with your children that you hopefully had. At the 50s and early 60s particularly, women's roles were very sharply defined. For instance, when I graduated from high school, I had very few choices, really. Women could be a secretary, a nurse, a teacher, a mother. That was about it. There were small variations here and there were some women who were braver than others who did more exciting things than that. But most of us bought the propaganda that that's what we were supposed to do. And it was very constricting, needless to say, because I didn't want to be a secretary or a nurse or a teacher, and I was not ready to be a mother. So in 1960, I did go with the airlines and became a stewardess, which was an okay thing at that time. But it wasn't a career like the others were, because you only could do it until you were 32.
Why?
Because this was a time with many, many rules. And when I was flying for American Airlines, you were fired when you became 32. You were fired if you got married. You were fired if you gained too much weight. You were fired if you didn't wear the kind of makeup that they thought you should wear. They were fired if you could be fired for not wearing a girdle, because we weren't supposed to wiggle at all when we walked. Very strange. Do you guys even know what a girdle is?
No.
It's a very constricting piece of underwear that you wore over your underpants that really, truly was almost like a straitjacket for this part of your body. It was bizarre. Very bizarre. You guys, you can't have any idea what it was like.
No.
We had to wear certain shades of nail polish and lipstick. We had to wear nail polish so that nobody would ever see any dirt that might get under our fingernails on the airplane. It's so strange to talk about it now because, of course, it's 180 out. There's no such thing anymore. So, is that enough on that subject?
Direct influence of the fear of communism in your life?
Not really. America felt pretty secure. We were not a country that had very many communists, and they were more of a political party than they were a way of life, like it was in Russia and Eastern Europe and Cuba, the other countries that were 100% communist. It's a political system that Americans would have trouble buying because it's has no freedom. It's basically the bottom line. It has no freedom. And people are not allowed to do an awful lot of things under communism. It's supposed to be all for one, all for, how do you say it, all for everybody kind of thing.
Yeah.
Not supposed to be a lot of private ownership, that kind of stuff. It's supposed to be communistic, everybody in a group. I don't know how to explain it. Anyway, it wasn't something that was going to resonate with Americans because we had so much freedom.
What was it about Elvis and rock and roll? This is just totally shifting gear. What was it about Elvis and rock and roll that appealed to the younger people of like that, sort of the younger?
Oh my God, it was like a huge revolution, because we had people like Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, and they sang ballads, and Elvis came along and he was singing rock and roll, and it was a very exciting kind of music as opposed to what we had. Ours was very nice and it was good to dance to, but slow dancing. But you didn't slow dance to rock and roll. And Elvis was he was a very sexual kind of person, and the fact that he moved his lower body when he sang, they called him Elvis the Pelvis.
I've heard that.
Yeah. This was all brand new. We had never seen anything like it. The thing is that that kind of thing did exist in some communities. For instance, a lot of the jazz people and the blues people were precursors of rock and roll, but it didn't hit the whole of society. They were very isolated. But rock and roll hit like a bomb almost. It was pretty amazing. When he was on the Ed Sullivan Show, the television only showed him from the waist up. It showed him from the waist down. It was pretty funny. And of course, then came the Beatles and so many people after that. So it was scary to our parents because rock and roll was a euphemism for sex, and that was not something that they wanted to have hanging around.
Yeah. I can see why.
Yeah.
So we're gonna move on to civil rights stuff civil rights unit.
Great.
Describe how you felt the first time you saw segregated facilities.
Oh my word. I was flabbergasted because I had grown up in Boston, and when I went to Dallas for a school, 6-week school, that was the first time I ever saw, right next to each other, colored water fountain, and a white water fountain. Colored bathrooms, white bathrooms. Places where black people they weren't even called blacks then, they were called Negroes. They were not allowed to go. For instance, they couldn't sit down at a restaurant that white people were having lunch in. They had to go to a separate one. It was bizarre. I had never seen anything like it because we didn't have segregation like that here in the North. But it definitely was a thing there. This was 1960 when I was in Dallas.
What was it like in the North?
In the North, we didn't have separate facilities. They could go really anywhere they wanted to. Now, there were some places that they themselves knew that they probably weren't as welcome, but there was no rule saying they couldn't go there. I'm sure that there were places that made it, well, that's not exactly true. I'm sure there were, for instance, golf clubs that they couldn't join, couldn't play golf there. I'm sure there were jobs that they couldn't have. I'm sure there were a lot of, it just was not as blatant as it was in the South. right out in the open.
What's the media portrayal of the civil rights movement like?
Sometimes it was a little bit sensationalist. And it depended upon who was doing the reporting, of course, like anything else. The media here in the North was as appalled as most of us were at the separation of the races in the South. I'm not so sure that they were as unbiased about the more subtle forms of separation up here in the North. I think they tried to be as fair as they could, but of course everybody has their own prejudices, and so some of that leaked out into the media also. So it's never been a perfect world, unfortunately.
How did the civil rights movement help Blacks achieve the American dream, do you think?
It just basically broke down a lot of barriers for them, because it plain was not allowed to discriminate in so many ways that they had either blatantly or not so blatantly been forced to live with all those years. And luckily we had Martin Luther King, and he believed in nonviolence, and that was a major thing. Had there been, because there was a lot of violence anyway, and he himself was killed, as you know, assassinated. But I think without him and some other leaders, it would have been far more violent and have gone on for a lot longer time. People would have been more resistant to giving Blacks their rights, which they deserved, certainly. As a side note, I told you a little bit about what stewardesses had to do. In some ways, women got some civil rights also as a byproduct of that, the Black civil rights movement. About the middle of the 60s, the airlines could not make women wear the clothes, you know, the girdles. And they couldn't fire them when they got older. They couldn't. It wasn't so easy to get rid of. They had far more rights to keep their job, and that happened in other professions also. And women still today don't often get equal pay for doing the same job as a man. That's slowly coming, but look how long it's been. Men don't give up their privileges very easily. They like their little superiority, just so to speak, you know. So, civil rights, and certainly I never saw, I only read about what went on in the South with the lynchings and the killings and all of that. It was horrendous. It was absolutely horrendous. As I say, nobody wanted to give up what they viewed as their right to lord it over other people, particularly people whom they often didn't think of as people. So, there you go.
It's a great way to end it.
Okay.
That's our last question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
That's it?
Yeah.
Holy cow.